Talk about money in a vet practice and watch the room go quiet. Bring up pricing, revenue, or compliance numbers, and suddenly the team that lights up over patient care goes cold. It's like business is somehow the opposite of caring, but it isn't. And that disconnect is costing practices more than they realize. Welcome to the Veterinary Business Podcast, where practice owners get strategies and build stronger teams along with stronger businesses. So I'm your host for this session, Don Adeesha. It's great to have you here. Today, I'm joined by Senani Ratnayake. She's a registered veterinary technician, a leadership strategist, and the founder of Motivatum Consulting. With over 2 decades inside the veterinary practice, she spent her career helping vet teams see something most never do: the real impact of their everyday choices on the veterinary business. Now, together we are going to discuss how to talk about money and efficiency without losing your team's heart. So by the end of the episode, you'll have the tools for a total mindset shift from seeing the business as a necessary evil to seeing it as the engine that makes high quality medicine possible. This episode is brought to you by Ekwa Marketing, the team helping veterinary practice owners grow without burning out their people. Welcome to the podcast, Senani.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Now, before we get into the core conversation, you were an RVT a long time before you moved into the leadership role. When you were starting out on the clinic floor, did you ever imagine you'd be the one defending the business side of the practice?
No. I was right alongside my fellow team members thinking that business was a bad word. Honestly, and thinking, what do I know about business? I'm not a business person. I have no business, pun intended, I suppose, getting involved in any of that, And so, no, I honestly would never have thought that I'd be sitting here on a podcast with you now talking about business and how important it is for veterinary teams to understand that side of it, for sure.
Right. Now that's a great point you mentioned because, is it my business to consider about the overall health of things, right?
Yeah.
You always put yourself on the sideline. So why do veterinary teams often feel uncomfortable talking about the business side? And where does that discomfort really come from?
I have so many answers to that question. There's so many different things. And I think it depends on the person a little bit as well. One of the first things that comes to mind that just makes people feel uncomfortable is they perceive that there are conflicting values. If I perceive I'm in veterinary medicine because I love animals, I'm here to help them no matter what. And then, here's someone talking about business and profit and budgets and labor and all of these words that, sound very financial, sound very transactional. It feels in contradiction of our actual purpose. And so it gets in the way of helping. And I guess that's another one, right? Is that if we're thinking about business, are we compromising patient care? Because I think often people think that if we're thinking about the business, it's to save money. So it's to cut corners, right? And we're not cutting corners necessarily, but people might perceive that if I'm prioritizing the business, it's to the detriment of our patients. And so, I think there's just a lot of optics issues like that. The idea that business doesn't resonate with me. I'm not a business person. I don't want to think about the business. Can you care about the business and medicine at the same time? All of those things, I think just even the fear of, if I don't understand business, then I shy away from it. Just like a lot of things when we don't understand it well, it can be a little bit intimidating. And especially on a veterinary team, if you have a practice manager or a practice owner, then it becomes an other job. It's somebody else's job to care about those things. And I'll be over here caring about the patients and the clients and, pet parents are where I want to spend my time. And so, yeah, I think there's so many things, we're relationship people. And so the idea of business and it being transactional and having to talk about money, whether it's to pet parents or whether it's about money in the practice itself, it takes away from, I think, what people want to spend their time doing, and they don't see the value of it. So,
right. So how do we begin to end this salesman stigma where staff really feels like the dealers instead of healers?
Yeah, I always like to talk about the fact that we're not salespeople, we're advocates. I don't ever want someone to feel like they are selling something that isn't in the patient's best interest or isn't in the pet parent's best interest. And sometimes there's something that's specifically for the patient's interest or the pet parent's interest, and sometimes it's in both's best interest. And either way, if we are recommending something and if we are exchanging money for a service or a product that is in their best interest, then you're yes, fine selling because money's exchanging hands, but you're advocating. You're doing the right thing. And so I think it's really important that we remember sales is also not a dirty word, just like business isn't a dirty word. It's not a bad thing. It's something that we just have to do in order to continue to be able to help and facilitate us being able to help. Because on the flip side of it, you can't be wanting to make money, make a living in this profession, hoping for a paycheck in this profession, if you aren't actually contributing to a business that is generating money in order for you to get paid. And that doesn't mean it has to, generate money for the wrong reasons, or we have to sell dirty sales tactics, be slick salespeople, selling things that aren't necessary. We don't have to do that. We can do more than enough good work by just making recommendations that our patients actually need and will benefit from. And yes, money will exchange hands, and then you can sleep at night because you've been advocating appropriately. So
now with the pet inflation hitting 2025, 2026 reports, do you think techs are just scared that they're pricing people out of pet ownership?
absolutely, it could be that. I mean, I think it's hard for everybody. I think all of us are also consumers. And
Yeah.
we see price increases everywhere right now. It's not just in veterinary medicine. And so as consumers, I think we are cost conscious. I think we are price sensitive. Depending on where you are when you're watching this, I'm in Ontario, I'm in Canada. We don't get a bill for healthcare. And so we don't really have a good understanding of what things do cost because we never see those invoices. So then everything is just relative, right? And yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges when we're talking about money is perception of value. And it's not our client's perception of value, it's our own perception of value of ourselves. I think that we are not great at perceiving our own value, especially our professional services, not products that come in a box or in a bottle. Our actual services, our time, our education, and what that's actually worth. I think that if we can't value that appropriately, it's really difficult to then convey that value to somebody else.
That's very interesting. Now, how can leaders help team members really connect business concepts to things that they already care about?
I think, you use the right word. It's connection. We have to really make sure that we're connecting things that are business oriented to things they care about, which means first we have to figure out, so what do they care about? There's a chart that I've used for a really long time. Well, I guess it's not a chart. It's a set of questions, I suppose. And I'll distribute it to the whole team and we'll all fill it out together. And it's essentially a what's important to you chart. And so the first section is what's important to you. And it's helping animals through things like better equipment and having more continuing education, having better adherence from our pet parents, doing renovations in the practice, getting more services, having better equipment, all of these types. So they have a bigger team, right? So helping animals through all of those things. So what's important to you, and they circle it or they write in their answers. And then what's important to you for feeling supported and valued. And in that section, it's things like, of course, wage increases and bonuses, but also, not feeling overworked and positive feedback and developmental feedback, performance evaluations, even just the idea of, it's important to me to feel valued and supported by having my ideas heard and understanding the bigger picture. So they go through and they answer these questions. And once we determine, okay, what are the things that are important to you, then we talk about what do we require as a hospital in our practice environment to prioritize these things that are so important. And honestly, inevitably, it's not a trick question. It's just that inevitably, it always comes down to two things, and that's time and money. And so when we realize that in order to have these things that we want, that we value, that are important to us, it requires time and money. It allows us to drive a case for, okay, we need to be more efficient. We need to be more productive. We need to be more profitable. It opens the door to have those conversations because we've anchored it to things that we've already determined we do actually care about.
Okay, now something you mentioned over here, how can you feel more supported? And sometimes there's that option of being overworked. But according to this great report that I'm sure everyone in the veterinary community knows by now, the AVMA's report on like the mass exodus that is happening with the veterinary technicians and also the reasoning behind it. One is the reimbursement, and the second most popular reason is underutilization. So how can you be overworked, but also commend that the reason why you're leaving the veterinary industry is underutilization? Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, what comes to mind for me when I think about the practices that I work with, what comes to mind is that sometimes we are overworked with things that other people could be doing. And the same is true for veterinarians. Like it trickles down. If veterinarians are doing technician work or veterinary nurse work, if veterinary technicians are doing the work that vet assistants could be doing, then you don't feel as valued. You don't feel like you're using your time appropriately, like they're making the most of your education and of your expertise. So that can feel exhausting. Even if it's easier work, it's draining, it's exhausting, it's not empowering at all. And so then it becomes an issue, right? Then it becomes that it's impacting job satisfaction. So I can see there being a bit of an issue there, a disconnect when it comes to what am I being overworked by? And then the flip side is I think there are certain environments where people are overworked, where maybe it might not be that we are literally actually understaffed, but if we're not being efficient, if we don't have good systems in place, if we don't have good protocols in place, if we are not utilizing our people appropriately and our time appropriately, then we can sometimes feel like we're just spinning, right? Working and getting nowhere. And so I think that can also be an issue, is just having those inefficiencies that then lead to us feeling exhausted at the end of the day and unproductive. We don't still have the outcomes that we wanted, right? So I think that that's an issue.
And that just compounds back to the business owner in what you mentioned, time and money is required for basically everything inside the practice. So if you're underutilizing that license, you're really selling yourself short as well.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Now, what business information should veterinary teams actually know? And how can leaders really share it without it feeling overwhelming?
I suppose that ties to your other question. I think, I mentioned before that I think it's really important that we look at efficiency. These are my favorite three: efficiency, productivity, and profitability. And so I love talking about, what is the type of environment we want to work in? So what would it look like if we were less efficient in our hospital? And what would it look like if we were more efficient? What would it look like if we were less profitable, more profitable, less productive, more productive? When we talk about it as a group, we discuss it. And then we talk about, so why does that matter? And how does it benefit us? Because of course, at the end of the day, we want to be in a place where we're more efficient and more productive and more profitable. But what does that really look like? What does that mean? I need to be contributing. You need to be contributing in order to get there. So I think that's an important starting place. Sometimes people think if we're going to talk to the team about business, we have to get into dollars and cents and open up the books. And one has nothing to do with the other. Opening up the books is not your pathway to talking about business necessarily. It depends on your team, right? It depends on where they are now, what they already understand. It can be incredibly overwhelming to just start using language and dollars and things that aren't relatable, things they can't connect to, as your starting point. And so maybe just choosing something that they already know, that they care about, that they're already on board with. Sometimes I'll do things with teams where we'll look at something we did in a previous year over where we are now, or in a previous season. So even things like wellness screening, right? So if we look at wellness screening, how many wellness screenings did we do in the month of May in 2025? How many did we do in the month of May in 2026? How many did we do in June? What do we think is possible for this June? And make it a little bit fun, make it a bit of a game, and talk about the fact that, yes, do we want to increase the number of wellness screenings? Of course we do. But is that because we're trying to do dirty business sales stuff? No, it's because every patient will benefit from this proactive, preventive care that we're trying to do. And so can we look at how can we increase in the things that are important to increase in? Recognizing still with access to care and everything else, not everything is a perfect fit for everybody, but also making sure that where it should be recommended, it is recommended. Where we should be talking about it, we are talking about it. When we can get someone to say, yes, I think that's a good idea, we do that. And so when we can make some choices like that, choose some things that they care about. I've even done this with fecals. We have a little who cares about poo kind of thing, and we have a game, and it can be so interesting to start to drive business discussions by looking at things tactically, things that we care about and we already know about. We don't need to dump everything at the team all at once by opening books and talking in terminology they don't understand. We need to start by getting them excited that when we do something that benefits our patients, it benefits the business. And when we do something that benefits the business, it benefits our patients and the pet parents and us. That's a big deal, I think.
Okay, so start the conversation with the benefit to the patient and then lead in.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Now, another thing here is that frontline staff often see prices rising and feel a bit guilty towards the client, especially if their own wages aren't keeping up with the clinic's growth. Do you have anything to say to that?
I mean, I think it's, this will be the case forever and always, I think, a little bit, unfortunately. And we have to remember that whatever it is, whatever wage we are currently making, we only know our situation. There are some people who aren't making that much money, but they also don't have a lot of expenses at home. And so that money stretches further. There are other people who make a lot of money, but they have way more expenses at home. And so that money doesn't stretch as far. It is not appropriate for us to put our own circumstances on somebody else and make assumptions about their situation. Is it difficult to talk about money? Yes, it can be difficult to talk about money, especially when we don't perceive the value. But if we perceive the value and we can look someone in the eye because we confidently believe it is in their pet's best interest or their best interest, then we have to do that. And we can still acknowledge that, this is a big investment. I love the word investment. It's one of my favorites. I'll probably bring it up again at some point during this conversation, even because it's so tied to the business piece. But framing things as an investment, this is an investment in Max's health. That kind of thing goes a long way. If we get nervous about it, or if we come across like we don't believe it's a good idea, then it's taking away our ability to help a patient, because the client will sense that. They're going to sense it's like, oh, you can do it if you want to, or, oh, I'm sorry, it's so much money. And they think, oh, is it so much money? Some of them don't perceive it's as expensive as we do. And now we're putting that out there to them and they're thinking, oh, is it? And so what we want to do is just be mindful of how our language and our choices are impacting someone else's perception, and that our own bias isn't impacting those choices we're making when it comes to language.
Right. So let's not shoot ourselves in the foot before we get anything out there. Now we've been talking about the gap between what a team does every day and what they actually understand about how the practice runs. When that gap closes, everything shifts. Decisions get sharper, accountability rises, growth stops feeling like the owner's problem and starts feeling like the team's win. But here's the thing, most practice owners are stuck in the same gap with their marketing. You see the activity, the website, the ads, the reviews, but the connection between all of it and actual practice growth, well, that part stays murky. So you keep adding tools, spending more, hoping something lands. Now that's exactly why Ekwa Marketing built a complimentary marketing strategy meeting. Think of it less like a marketing call and more like a diagnostic for your practice. You'll sit down with Lila, a veterinary marketing strategist who has worked with hundreds of clinics, and together you'll look at what your marketing is actually telling you. What's bringing in new clients, what's quietly costing you, where the leaks are in your client journey, and what a focused 6-month growth plan could look like for your clinic, your market, and your goals. No more guessing, no more piling on tools and budget without clarity. You walk away seeing the full picture, the same way you want your team to see the practice. Book your complimentary marketing strategy meeting at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'll repeat that one more time. Veterinary Business Institute, that's one word, .com/MSM. Now, Ekwa only takes a limited number each month. If this resonates, grab a spot while it's open. All right, let's get back to our conversation. So, Senani, what terminology matters the most? Let's get a bit specific here. And are there any words or phrases leaders should avoid?
I think it does come down to how we frame things, as I mentioned earlier. It's important to note here that our goal, it's okay if our goal is to make money, but there are right ways to make money and wrong ways to make money. And there are plenty of right ways to make money that align with our values. And so when we're choosing our language, making sure that that is what comes across is really, really important. But framing, I've heard so often practice owners or managers say to the team, inventory and payroll are our biggest expenses. You guys cost us a fortune, like this kind of thing. And what we're doing is saying that pay is a burden. And that, frankly, can feel like a slap in the face a little bit, especially depending on the tone or the mindset of the person who's hearing it. If they're already feeling a little bit down or undervalued, it's like, oh, yeah, so sorry, you have to pay me. It can feel really uncomfortable for people. And so this is where, I mentioned this word earlier, investment. Payroll is one of our largest investments in operating this hospital. When we talk about our people as an investment, which, by the way, they are. So that's not us making something up. And if you don't see your people as an investment, I have a different soapbox for that for maybe another day. But, I think it is really, really important that we recognize payroll is an investment in us operating the hospital. And that tells people we value you. We're investing in you so that we can have these incredible outcomes with our patients, with our pet parents. And so instead of sounding cold and transactional, we're bringing that warmth to it. Language like profit and revenue and costs or expenses, even some people don't even realize cost and expense is the same thing, things like that. We have to break these things down, and we need them to understand it in the most basic terms, in the idea that revenue is the same as income, and revenue is just how much something is times how many times we do it or how many of them we do, that kind of thing. All of that stuff has to be laid out for people in a way where they can actually understand it, in a way that they can start to make sense of those words, margin versus markup. We talk about markup all the time. And just like with at the end of the day, we run the reports at the end of the day in our software and we see a magic number. This is the number, this is the dollars we made today. And there are people on the team who think that dollar figure is the take home. That is what the owner takes and puts in their pocket. Congratulations to them. And we just get this little part of it. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so one of the things I actually love doing with teams is working out what is our break even for the day. And that often shocks them. The idea that usually, sometimes it's not till noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon that we've just paid for the people and the lights to be on for today so that now we can start making money. Understanding things like that are critical, and it gets them involved. That's the big picture conversation that needs to be had. I'm trying to think of, when you say language, particular language to avoid, I think it's just being careful not to get too complex, not to get too in the weeds, to really bring it to basics, but don't imply that you're dumbing it down. You're not doing that. We're talking to people who don't have a business background. And in the same way they are experts in the things that they do, we want to help develop their skills in another area. And it's not on them to be able to understand it immediately. It's on us to be able to connect the dots appropriately and connect it to things they care about and talk about how we care about these things as a hospital. I think that's where it counts.
So in preparation to asking this question, right, I was thinking about it too, and I was wondering, and this kind of ties back into an answer you gave in the first question, actually. What if we say, instead of selling a treatment, something along the lines of like advocating for the patient? So instead of talking about you got to sell this treatment, we're always going to talk about advocating for the patient. Is that a good way to go about it, or do we simplify selling a treatment into something more digestible?
You mean when we're talking to the pet parent, or when we're still talking to each other?
To our staff, to your staff.
Yeah. I think we can simplify it to that, to talk about advocating. But I also want to make sure that selling or sales doesn't become a word we avoid altogether. Because we are selling something, just by basic definition, someone has to pay for something, and that's okay. That's all right that they have to pay money for something, as long as it's something they actually needed. And so I think from a mindset shift, we want to remind them that we're advocating. And then from a being mindful of the words we're choosing, avoiding the word sales or selling altogether, I think that's to our detriment. I don't think we should do that. In the same way, I know I've talked to people who say, I just don't tell them I'm talking about business. I just don't use the word. And it's like, but it is a business. It's a hospital and it's a business. And we work in this business. So we should take pride in the fact that it is a healthy, successful business. And, I think that's where it needs to land, is that we're not simplifying to the point of taking away the important language.
I appreciate that, because, at the end of the day, we're really trying to educate our own team on the business side of things.
Yes.
And not trying to hide it and just,
No, we're empowering them. We want them to be empowered. We want them to feel excited about this knowledge that they have. They don't need to run the numbers. They don't need to have that skill set. But the idea of understanding their impact, every single team member has an impact. And understanding that impact is what keeps us out of trouble, honestly.
Appreciate that. Now, you mentioned earlier a couple of fun ways or practical ways we can help the whole team really see how their choices influence the health of the practice. Can you give us a little bit more on that?
Yeah. I think we should always make things as fun as possible. So, and especially if we're going to teach them language, if we're going to teach them some skills, give them some additional knowledge, open up that big picture, then we want them leveraging that knowledge. It's why I like breaking down profit and revenue and costs and things like that, because they do, as I said, they literally impact these every day. So being able to connect the dots, right? Having like, another thing I'll do with teams is I have like a little bit of a script, a little framework where they insert certain words. So when I give somebody a discount, right? When I give somebody a discount, I'm impacting X. Is it profit? Is it revenue? Is it what is it that I'm impacting? And why does it matter? When I'm trying to think of common ones. Oh, I know, one of the most common ones. When I grab a stack of gauze squares to do a nail trim and then take that whole stack where really only one got dirty, but now they've all been on the floor and we throw them in the garbage, that kind of thing. What is the impact that I'm having? I have a whole list of these actually, honestly, like it's, when I work unapproved overtime, but also good ones when I turn off the lights, when I speak up in rounds, when I attend rounds versus when I don't speak up in rounds. All of these things are connected. They connect directly to the health of our business. So can we have some fun with it? One of my team members actually came up with a bingo card for this. So you could have some real fun with it and say, how many of these did we achieve, and maybe get Starbucks or something for the team when we get a certain, combination. Yeah. When we actually hit a bingo that we've done a good job of protecting the health of the business. If we can look at the hospital the way we look at our patients, it is a living, breathing thing. The things we do environmentally to it impact its ability to thrive. And so that matters a lot. And if we can get people thinking like that, that can be really, really helpful. They need to be working in a healthy business. That's in everybody's best interest. And so just like for our patients, where we can do things proactively, where there's preventive care, we can screen for certain illnesses before we see symptoms, right? That same thing exists for business. That exact same thing exists for business. So if we can start framing the things that we want to do, the things we need everyone doing in those terms, then it allows us to normalize. One other really fun game that I like doing with everyone is, there's actually two that come to mind. One is just to create contests, full stop, right? Can we drive revenue differently, manage our resources differently? And managing resources, by the way, is cutting costs. It's just a different way of saying it, right? To be able to manage our resources effectively, to support patient care, that kind of thing. But get them to come up with ideas. What are 3 fun ways that we could do this? If you only had $20 to spend, what is something you would buy to make our hospital more efficient? $20 is not a lot of money. So run a contest, have everyone come up with ideas, and the top 3 people, it'll cost you $60. Go and do those 3 things and get everyone more efficient. The other one that I really like doing is I split the team into teams and they design their own hospitals. And so they identify goals for that business, and then they determine, so what are the things I'm going to prioritize and what are the things I'm willing to compromise on? And then we test their business models. Because, inevitably you have people who want the best equipment, they want the best team members, they want a large complement of team members, they want to pay them really well, we want our pricing to be lower, we want a decent number of patients, but we want to give them really long appointment times, so we schedule them a certain way, we want fancy equipment, we want a really great facility, we want all of the things, and they can't exist at the same time. And so when we actually build it out, then we start actually having to have conversations around, okay, if you want this and this, what are you going to give up on this side? And it just strikes really interesting conversation, and it gives people perspective, and it gets insight that you wouldn't have if you were just speaking at them. So it allows them the opportunity to wear the practice owner and manager hats a little bit and test some things out in very simple terms, but in a way that allows them to really appreciate the push and the pull, to appreciate that balance that we're constantly doing, right? We would love to give everyone everything. It's not possible. So what is possible? Turn it into a bit of a game.
Love that. Gamify it.
Gamifying
it. Now, Senani, we have arrived at the end of our podcast here.
Okay.
I would love for you to give a golden takeaway. What is the one key takeaway for our listeners from this conversation?
The one key takeaway, my goodness. I think the one key takeaway is just don't underestimate what the team is capable of in understanding business and their impact on it. Everyone plays a role in how our business operates. And yes, it might be that when you say, I want to talk to you about the business, everyone scrunches their faces and says, no, I don't want to, which we discussed. But it's just the word. It's just the word and the optics around it. It's not that they don't want to be empowered. We like being empowered. We like knowing things. And so make a real effort to empower the team with information that allows them to see a bigger picture, because it will pay off. It will pay off tenfold. The more they understand, the more they can contribute in a positive way and feel confident in how they're doing it. And then the easier it is for leaders. So that would be my key takeaway.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Senani Ratnayake.
Thank you.
Now, how can our listeners get in touch with you and your work at Motivatum?
Absolutely. You can email me. It's Senani at imotivatum.com, which I can provide you after. So Senani at imotivatum.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to connect on LinkedIn and go from there. And then, of course, I work at Vet Alliance. So if you're in Canada, if you're an independently owned practice, we would love to hear from you in that regard as well. I work with our members all the time and love doing it. And so it's sort of a membership that pays for itself, and we'd love to have you be a member.
Amazing. So thank you very much once again to Senani. And if you're listening in and you're ready to build a practice where your team feels capable, valued, and aligned with where the business is going, well, it also starts with the right strategy. Book your free marketing strategy session at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'll repeat that one last time, veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'm Don Adeesha, and this has been the Veterinary Business Podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.